Teacher of logic, Dr. Deacon, Ananias. Teacher of logic, teacher of logic, Dr. Deacon, Ananias. Teacher of logic, teacher of logic, Dr. Deacon, Ananias. Teacher of logic, Dr. Deacon, Ananias. Teacher of logic. Another good lecture, another good lecture, another good lecture, another good lecture. Another good lecture, 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 another good lecture.
The bell is rung, and class is now in session. Broadcasting coast to coast from beautiful Montana, put your chin in your hand and think along with your resident professor of philosophy, Father, Dr. Deacon, Ananias Sora.
Welcome, everybody. How's the audio? Let's do an audio test. I did a test last night, if you remember, after Patrick and I did the stream, and the audio was all good on my part. So looks like there was something either with the YouTube from Patrick's, or there was some latency issues. There's nothing we can do about that. So it caused a delay in receiving my audio. All right, we are going to, let's see if I got my volume up. I'm going to go over something that we were talking about in Discord, and it was just making me think about epistemology, the questions of justification and providing justification for one's justification criteria. So what I thought I'd do is just go over the actual argument that actually elicited this conversation that we had earlier, and it was kind of a catalyst for me to start thinking about this and maybe talk to you guys about. And then what we can do is, if you're in the Discord, you can always, does somebody have a Discord link we could throw in? You can join the voice chat and then ask any questions. Now it shows that all of you are muted in... Is that supposed to be? Can any of you talk in Discord real quick, just so I can... That's weird, I can't... Alright, I'm gonna have to fix something on here, because I can't hear you guys. Let's see... User setting... Just bear with me 1 second. All right, talk now. Go ahead. So, shoot. For some reason on the computer, it's not... Oh, you know what I think the issue is? Okay, try again.
Hello.
All right, I got you coming through my phone.
Hello.
Yeah. I don't know if everybody's going to like hearing that. It might. It looks like my Discord crashed on the computer. That's right. Let's see what everybody's saying in the YouTube. How's the audio? Okay, so that's what the issue is. I'll have to do it through the phone. I think I talked to Jay. There was something with this when he tried this. I'll have to just do it through the phone because you got two programs here. You got the OBS is pulling my audio, and it's not going to let me stream it through. Let me just try one more time. Okay, test 1, 2, 3. Somebody talk in the Discord. Shoot. Ah. Yes, I fixed it.
Hello?
Yep, perfect.
Can I have my Discord education now, please?
Your Discord education is now ready to begin.
Here's a $20 tuition. Thank you. Thank you for the education.
Thank you. And yes, I will be taking super chats and questions in the YouTube. All right, so somebody brought up, who was it that brought up something interesting? How many are you familiar with Gottfried Leibniz? No? Yes?
He's one of the two guys that invented calculus, right?
That's right. And also pretty amazing, great philosopher, created monadology as well. So, and various arguments for the existence of God. What I believe he has a version of the ontological argument. He has presentations of cosmological arguments. He's got some great arguments for theodicy. So, as you know, I obviously critique natural theology. I critique most everything, right? Somebody asked me, who's your favorite philosopher? Like I think it was the doctor was asking, oh, you teach philosophy, who's your favorite philosopher? I'm like, you mean who do I enjoy reading more? Or like, I'm like, well, they're all wrong. Sometimes they're right in different ways, but it just seemed like such a strange kind of question. I'm like, what am I, 5 years old? Like, what's your favorite color? It's like, don't you grow up and be, like, you get more nuanced in your responses. And as a philosopher and doing epistemology, it's my duty to critique all of them. So an argument came up today that we can actually go over, and I'll just talk a little bit about that because it relates to issues of justification. So far, so good?
Yep.
Sounds good.
So somebody presented a Leibnizian argument, and consists of 4 premises and the conclusion. Premise 1, every contingent fact has an explanation. And you know what? Maybe I'll just put this on. I'm going to see if I can screen share this. It'll make it easier. I don't know, I'm a visual learner, so I need to see these things. So if I do capture, that's you in the Discord, but that's not what I want. I want my Microsoft Word notes there. Okay, here we go. Premise 1. Every contingent fact has an explanation. Premise 2. There is a contingent fact that includes all other facts. Premise 3. Therefore, there is an explanation of this fact. Premise 4. This explanation must involve a necessary being. Therefore, 5. In 5, this necessary being is God, and then I guess the conclusion could actually be like, therefore God must exist, or something like that. So, as our friend in the Discord posted this and asked, is that a good argument? What do you guys think? What's your initial kind of thoughts on
what is meant by a fact that includes all other facts?
So, yeah, it's actually a clever and tricky argument. So, it's almost it's almost self-referential insofar as that it's premise 2 is referring to premise 1. So in premise 1 here, we have the universal quantifier of every contingent fact, or all contingent facts have an explanation. If that's true, then my statement about the truth of that includes the class of all existing contingent facts, correct? So then that means that 2 is true. Namely, there's a contingent fact. What is contingent? Here's the self-referential. What's the contingent fact here in it's premise 2. Premise 2 is the contingent fact, and what's the predicate? What's being said here? It's talking about the class of all contingent facts. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of complicated, and that's why it was fun to actually go over this argument. I really enjoyed thinking about it because it was quite clever. Let's see what the people in the...
Yeah, it makes sense.
So let's look at number 1. All right, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here and steelman the argument. So Leibniz would say, well, premise 1 is just true by definition. Every contingent fact has an explanation. If you read Leibniz, he has the principle of sufficient reason. And this is basically, in kind of a condensed form, just simply stating the definition of the principle of sufficient reason. That there's a reason for all contingent facts. Okay, so if that's true, then what about my statement, my factual statement about number 1 being true? Now, self-referential is a really interesting state of affairs. So, for example, the following sentence, or the following statement contains, how's this go? No, this statement contains 5 words. Well, what is it referring to? It's referring to itself. So it's contained within itself, right? It's self-referential. So you can step where you can basically talk, well, if, and it's sort of like these meta levels, right? I'm thinking about my thinking. I'm talking, now I'm talking about my talking. Do you see what I'm doing there? And this is what's going on in the argument. If I could go back to sharing the capture. Leibniz is going to say, number 1, every contingent fact has an explanation. That's definitionally true. Therefore, my statement about that is going to be contingent upon what? 1 being true. So that means there's a contingent fact about number 1. And what does 1 say? 1 is the class of all contingent facts. So 2 must be definitionally true. There's a contingent. If 1's true, then 2, the statement about 1 and the class and the members contained in that class must be true and a contingent fact about that. Okay. So, therefore, it follows there's an explanation of this fact. Why? Because that would fall from 1 and 2, right? If 1 and 2 are true and 2's a fact, then there's also an explanation of number 2. Follow me so far? Let's see what the people in the... I'm taking my time on this because it is a tricky argument. We need to know all the... Yeah, who has a link? Oh, panel, thank you. Yeah, post a link in there. Feel free to come in and ask your questions. Okay, premise 1 through 3 is taken care of. Well, let's talk about 4. This explanation must involve a necessary being. Now, number 4 is not definitionally true. So perhaps this requires a bit more explanation. 4 would be true. And again, I'm steel manning the argument. Then I'm going to tear it all down. That's what I always do. Build it up and tear it down, boys. Okay, so this is referring back to 3. Do you see how they all build on one another? 2 builds on number 1, 3 builds on 2, and 4 builds on number 3. So premise 4 is referring to number 3. There is an explanation of this fact. Okay, so implicit within number 4 is either this is another contingent fact, in which case we're just back to number 2, that there's a contingent fact that includes all. Or it's a necessary being. Okay. Now, part of this implies a definition as well, because somebody could say, well, hey, the very meaning of contingent means that it doesn't actually explain itself. Its existence is not explained by itself. It depends on something else. So Leibniz would say, hey, once you've already gotten to here, you're already kind of done for, right? You already admit there's a contingent fact. And because of the principle of sufficient reason, here is definitionally being true, premise 1, that therefore there must be an explanation of this fact. Okay, that there is a fact about all facts, right? So at that point, Leibniz thinks he's got you that, well, look, it's not going to be another contingent facts, because then you'd be a fact about the contingent fact about the class of all contingent facts. So therefore, it must involve a necessary being. This necessary being is God. All right, did everybody follow that so far? Do I need to go back over anything? Yeah, Microsoft. I'd like to thank my sponsors, Microsoft Word 2007, OBS, and Zevia. Oh, I'm not on the camera. I gotta switch back to the... I always forget that with the... All right, how y'all doing? Did I just like put everybody to sleep? Because before I move on to the critique, we have to understand what the argument is so that...
Yo, Deacon, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
When they use contingent, are they meaning a specific definition for contingent, or is it like a general contingency?
That's a great question. Why don't we just take it as... One second, let me try to boost the sound here. Why don't we just take it as kind of general... Where was the sound? One second, let me try to... Because I want to hear you better on the... All right, go ahead, talk.
Testing. Check 1, 2, testing.
Yeah, sounds better. I just want to make sure that everybody in the the YouTube can hear you. So let's just take, for the sake of the argument, contingency to mean just exactly kind of how I defined it earlier, that its existence is not explained by itself. That it depends on something else. So that's why, if we go back to number one, every contingent fact has an explanation. Leibniz is going to argue, well, that's just definitionally true. Just as much as all bachelors are unmarried men, right? So you could just take premise one is a definition of contingency as well. Does that make sense?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. Somebody's writing in the premises in... Yeah. Okay, let's now go to my critique of that. Okay, the first thing is I would take issue with premises 1 through 3. Which is odd because somebody's going to be like, well, but those are just definitionally true. Then I'll talk about why premise 4 is problematic, and then premise 5, or if you want to take that as the conclusion. So what we're really wanting to know is, and this is what everybody always gets wrong, just because we agree to something doesn't mean that that's a justification. Or just because we think something's good doesn't mean that it's a justification. So this is what part of the stream is about justification. And what is your justification for your justification criteria? And as we see in all the debates that, either Jay or I do, or discussions or things that I treat, it ends up being arbitrary. Oh, because we all just agree to it. Or because you couldn't do otherwise. Or because of this. But that either ends up being question begging, arbitrary, or it just simply pushes the question back. Well, why come that? Why come, right? And you're just back into kind of an infinite regress of, I'm never getting an explanation. I'm never getting a justification for your justification criteria. So let me show here how we have the same thing with premises 1 through 3. This is what we would call, when we say something's definitionally true, we may mean that I'm providing a definition or an axiom, or we may be talking about something called a priori justifications and analyticity. And Kant famously talks about this in, where's my Immanuel Kant? In the Critique of Pure Reason, which I can't seem to find right now. Wait, hold on, here it is. Is that it? No. Where is it? Anyways, it's not important that I pull out the Critique of Pure... Oh, here it is. There's no much order to my books other than, let's see, what's up at the top seems to be philosophy, mathematics, and philosophy of science stuff. Then it goes theology, then kind of inspirational theology, Orthodox theology, more theology, and then it just starts to fall apart and get all mixed up. It's like theology, physics, got some of J. Dyer down there. He's all mixed up in there with Plato, and right next to Karl Marx and different stuff. So, but somehow I know where my books are. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Immanuel Kant talks about a priori analytic statements. And he declared, and many philosophers still believe this, that propositions or statements are justified on a priori basis in terms of analyticity because the predicate concept, in this case we're referring to an explanation beyond itself, right? So if I go back to premise 1, every contingent fact has an explanation. Implied in there, has an explanation means an explanation that's not itself, right? That it's beyond. So I could just rewrite that predicate to be something like, I could rewrite the whole premise. Every contingent fact has an explanation that's beyond itself. So the predicate concept, an explanation beyond itself, is included in the subject. What's the subject? Contingent fact. Just like when you say, well, how do you know that a married bachelor, a bachelor is an unmarried man? Well, do you go around like door to door and like interview, like inductively? Well, it turns out I've been to every country, and every door that I knock on, somebody says they're a bachelor. Guess what? It turns out that they're unmarried men. And that's how I concluded that all bachelors are unmarried men. It's like, no, we don't do that. Somebody would say you're justified insofar as that it's definitionally true in the sense of being an analytic a priori statement. And when you say, well, what the heck does that mean? They just mean that, well, look, when you unpack the subject, because you have synthesis, which is bringing things together. Analysis is to take something and break it apart. So what Kant and other philosophers are saying is if you take the subject in a statement and break it apart, you will find the concept, i.e. the predicate, contained within there. So when I dissect and do an analysis on the subject term bachelors, I find that contained within that is the definition, the predicate, being an unmarried man. So likewise, just like you'd asked, well, what do we mean by contingent fact? Well, we just define it to be such that a contingent fact is an explanation beyond itself. So therefore, Kant's going to say it's necessarily true and justified that all contingent facts are have an explanation, just as much so as all bachelors are unmarried men. And they almost get you there because you're like, gosh, dang, that sounds awesome. That sounds right. And like I always try to tell my students, you gotta approach philosophy this way. Imagine all philosophers are really, really smart con men. They're like multi-marketer, like con men or something. They're gonna sell you a lemon. It's no good. It's false. It's wrong. But the difference is they're just really, really smart. So that's why we hear this stuff and we're like, oh yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Like, how can I disagree with? But you have to be the skeptic and go and really pretend that everybody's a comment. Like, how's this guy pulling one over on me? Right? And that really helps you kind of dig through the text and think critically and be a good philosopher yourself. Is if you basically pretend that everybody is trying to fool me and sell me a lemon, and where are they getting me on this? I find that's very helpful. And you almost got me, Kant, you son of a gun. But here's the problem. I could just ask that I should qualify one more thing too. So Kant's going to say, it's justified. Why? It's true and it's justified. So we can know premise one because it's an a priori analytic statement. And if you ask him why, you'll actually get the exact same thing that we usually get in debates. Oh, because if you deny the predicate is true of the subject, then you'll be implicitly contradicting yourself. The very content of the subject, concept itself. So, in other words, we've heard this argument a million times. I'm justified because you can't do otherwise without contradicting yourself. And it's sort of like the the Descartes cogito. How do I know I exist? Well, I exist anytime. The conclusion is I exist, well, certainly anytime that I'm thinking and doubting whether I exist or exist, whether I exist or not. Because in order to deny that, I'd be contradicting myself. And therefore, Descartes concludes that I'm justified most certainly is the most clear and distinct idea and indubitable beyond any other kind of statements or thoughts that I think therefore I am. Is it justified? Why? Because To negate it would be to contradict yourself. Now we need to identify the intellectual swindle here. Like, what am I being sold on? Now, I might agree with that, and we've talked about this too, that simply agreeing that something's true doesn't mean justification. For example, the one that I always like to use is we all agreed that you should wash your hands after using the toilet. And let's say nobody ever pushes any further than that. They never questioned. They were like, well, yeah, we all agree that you should do that. But do you believe it for the right reasons? Somebody comes around and they're thinking about that. Like, is this person believing you should wash your hands for the right reasons? So they ask, well, why is it that, I know why I wash my hands after using the bathroom. Well, why do you? And then they say, well, because it obviously helps Bitcoin my Bitcoin investments to go up. Now you would say, you've got a true belief, but you're not justified in holding that, right? Or, well, let's say another person says, because I was brainwashed to actually believe that was true. They gave me drugs, and they tortured me in sleep deprivation until I basically said, you wash your hands after you use the toilet, right? Would any of you think like, well, dang, I guess all that matters is he got there. He's saying the right words. No, justification means holding a true belief for the right reasons. And so I'm going to bring this up, too, that is this the right reasons? Simply because we agree that you should avoid contradiction. Is that a justification in itself? Does everybody follow me so far? And I know I stop and I ask that question over and over again, but I don't want to go forward until we hit all those pieces and you see exactly what I'm saying. Because then in the end, it'll all make sense. And by the way, should I be in VC general to see if you guys have any questions in the text? Or should I just stay in general? I'll go into, if anybody can't speak and they want to type in VC general text, I'll be there. Okay. All good.
Yeah, Father Deacon, I'm following so far. So I think before you were talking about like what is the justification for your, I guess, justification premise. So if I could like word that
justification for your justification criteria.
Yeah,
That's
so
ultimately what we want to know, right?
yeah, so it's like if your justification criteria is true, why should you believe that for the right reasons? That's essentially what, I mean, it's kind of circular in a way.
Say that again?
So like, okay, so justification is like holding true belief for the right reasons.
Yes.
So it's like that statement is true for the right reasons is kind of like the justification for the justification statement. I guess it's kind of like a meta level, like what's the justification for justifications?
Well, yeah, it is a meta level. Like, so we all say that we have justifications, right? But we probably don't all believe that just because somebody says they have a justification doesn't make it true. And this always comes up as well when we're like debating with relativists. Well, he believes his religion's true too, and I'm like, well, who out there what a silly thing that is to like even bring up. Who out there is like, I found the man that believes that his beliefs are false, all of them. It's like, of course everybody believes that their beliefs are true. Of course everybody believes their justifications are justifications. But up in here, we're philosophers. We're not concerned with people giving psychological reports. Let me give you my psychological report about what I believe. and my beliefs, I believe my beliefs are true. It's like philosophers like, who cares what you believe or your psychological report? Is your belief true? And again, do you have good reasons for it? Of course you believe your justification is a justification, but is it? That's the question. And that framed in that kind of meta statement. What is then? It just pushes the question back, right? Yes, you believe that your justification is a justification. But what's your justification for believing that it's a justification, right? So yeah, it is meta level.
Okay, I see. I guess somebody could try to deny like that justifications are necessary, but then they would be kind of like self-defeating, right? It would be kind of like the sophists trying to deny logic while using logic.
Right, and I may just say, rather than at this point saying, therefore I'm assuming you'd be contradicting yourself, and so avoidance of contradiction is a justification, so you're not just. Instead of going that route, because maybe we're not there yet, I may just actually just say that it's just verbal diarrhea. I don't even understand what you're saying, right? So I haven't even gotten to the level of, some things can be pretty dang wrong. Some things can be so bad, bad in how that they're wrong. But some things are so bad they don't even get to the dignity of being wrong. That's just like meaningless. It's like you're not giving me anything to even semantically grasp onto, and you might as well have just been like, right? And it's just like just some noise that comes out of your mouth, right? There's no meaning to that. I could take that level before I even get to epistemology, but yeah, your intuition's correct. Okay, so let's go back.
Father Deacon, I got one more quick question. So, this might be kind of abstract maybe, but are words necessary for justification? So could you have a justification that doesn't require words to explain it? Would that be like self-evidently true stuff?
There was something I was reading in the Bonjour book that kind of talks about, I think it was with regards to empiricism, inductivism, and stuff like that. That has some bearing on this. Let me just... No, it must be in the a priori justification of knowledge here. It was something about, like, for example, I might rely on memory or rely on words, but then he made a qualification that doesn't necessarily imply that that is what justifies. And there was a nice way that he kind of put it. I'd like to read it because it's just much more condensed. It was something like it'll inevitably refer to words, so you'll never find like somebody giving a justification that's not using words, but that doesn't necessarily imply that the words and their meanings are justifications. It was something like that. Does everybody follow me on that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense because like implied in the act of argumentation is words are kind of necessary to explain things.
Yeah.
But I think the truthfulness of stuff and that being true for the right reasons are kind of set aside from the explanation of it.
Yes. I wish I could find.
So is this like a type of, the way that I'm thinking about it is it a linear argument in the sense of first you need the truth statement, then you need the justification, and the justification is what provides the truth to the truth statement, because that doesn't seem right.
There is a meta level. It's not what makes the statement true, but if you want to take it to a meta level, what would make your statement about the statement? What would make your statement true about the statement being true? That's sort of kind of like that immediately opens up the realm of justification, right? So obviously, me believing something's true doesn't make it true, and even if I believe it for the right reasons. But now if I'm taking what's called a second order reflexive statement about the truth of it, well, that can only be I mean, it kind of pushes it back, again further, but there's already, no, I guess it doesn't even imply justification. So does it? Because I can make a true statement about the true statement, but not even that second order statement not be for the right reasons. What if somebody's holding a gun to, or they brainwash me to talk about true things about true statements? Yeah, so I don't even think that gets into. So again, that's not the issue. The issue is, can I affirm it or believe it for the right reasons? So it's not simply just simply a meta second order reflexive thought, right? I just want to talk truly about true statements, right? That's not the issue that we're actually concerned about. I want to be able to do that for the right reasons. Does that make sense? I think it was a better way to kind of work through that when I thought about that.
I guess it kind of makes sense. Earlier I was thinking when you were explaining analyticity, why wouldn't you be able to question, I guess, the subject predicate inside of analyticity? You know what I mean? I guess that's where the crux of my issue right now is, I guess.
Yeah, I guess you could, and that's exactly where Kant's going to say. I mean, you can do that, but I mean, then you're just being inconsistent, like, because, or you're contradicting yourself or something like that. So if you say, well, why? It's like, well, I'm just trying to play Kant, think through, like, do you have to? There's nothing in this world that you have to do anything, right? You're free, like, you're free to do whatever you want. I mean, there's consequences too, but the question is, ought I to do that? And then, ought I to believe? And then you have to have reasons for that. And that's where we're going, is like, well, what are good reasons?
So the truth value of the statement almost takes a secondary position to the justification of the truth of the statement.
Yeah, so there's a couple different issues going. So justification already piggybacks and presupposes truth, right? Because I want to be, I mean, in some sense, it's analytical a priori. Well, justification means having good reasons to assert or believe a true statement. So, of course, it already presupposes true statements. Now, what you might be getting at is, well, how do I know it's a true statement? That's what we all want to know, right? When we're looking at this argument, how do I know that premise 1, 2, 3, and 4 are true propositions? Well, guess what? Knowledge minimally implies true justified belief. So now we're back into the, okay, well, I've got to get justification sorted out before I can ever be sure and know that propositions are actually true.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see it. That makes sense.
Yeah. So in one sense, it presupposes it, but I can't really know that a proposition is true until I actually have justification for my justification criteria. Because I don't want to be just like, oh, I just got it,
right.
Like it was just coincidental. Like I don't know the mechanisms or what the right. It's just, if it turns out.
And
that,
so,
yeah, go ahead.
What is it that bridges that gap and keeps them intertwined instead of separate?
Well, the fact that justification implies truth, generally speaking, right? We couldn't be talking about justification or justifying anything unless there was something to justify, and that's true beliefs, if that makes sense.
Yep, got it.
I'm trying to think. I don't know if I'm going to find the...
Not to derail it, but the last thing that you were saying before you asked for questions was that contradiction is not a good reason for...
Yeah, I'm going to go into why I bring that up, but I think I found...
Okay.
I think I found where Bonjour's talking about... Because he was talking about this like a priori, like people's arguments for a priori justification, and there's obviously the rebuttal that it's like, well, what doesn't make reference to or doesn't have at least a track history kind of record of a posteriori empirical experiences? And therefore, you can't have a priori justifications because it's always going to make reference to a memory or rely on. So I was thinking there was something analogous when you were bringing up words. Well, if words always have to be appealed to, does that mean that they're part of the justification? And he says concerning the experiences versus a priori that, let's see, and the issue on the basis of which the distinction between a priori empirical or a posteriori justification is drawn is precisely whether the justification itself involves an appeal to experience of the relevant sort as an essential ingredient, that is, assuming that the claim in question has been understood, a further appeal to experience is needed to provide a reason to think that it's true. So what he's saying there is not that there's some sort of chronological dependency that, like, of course I had to sense things and that's how I formed words and concepts and stuff like that. He's saying, given just the conceptual propositional content, is there a further appeal to experience that's needed? If so, then it would mean that experience is a justification, and a priori knowledges and justifications are not actually true. Analogously, I'd probably say that, look, simply referencing words or they're inseparable doesn't necessarily mean that therefore they're essentially part of the justification. And that doesn't imply, too, that you can make justifications without words. So I'm just kind of drawing some parallels of a possible argument that you could give. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe words are part of the... But that's at least some counterexamples to think that it might not, that words might not have to actually be part of the justification, even if they're always connected in that sense. You can't get out of using words. Does that make sense? Because notice what he said, the right sort of kind of relations. The right sort of essential ingredients. So it's not just they're always there or even part of the essence of something, but they need to be the right sort. So again, we're getting back into the right sort. This concept of the normative is being what we're talking about when it comes to justification. All right, I know it's getting a little bit more complicated there, but great questions. And if there isn't any more questions, we'll go back to... And you guys can always send me super chats. I need some money in the Streamlabs there. Let me just look in the YouTube chat. Hello, Jerry. We got Crispy UCD Johnson. We had Rachel in here. We have 29 people. Okay, let's go back to the whole contradiction issue. It's funny how much time we're actually spending. I thought we were just going to blow over this and it would open up to, which is fine. They would open up to other conversations and considerations. So if I were you, I would ask, well, wait a minute. Why should I think avoiding contradiction amounts to a justification? This is what both Kant's saying, why is... So again, let me rewind. So going back to your question, there might be reasons to think I can't deny analyticity. Like, so the question of bachelors being unmarried men. But my question is, and your question should be too, yeah, but is that a good reason to hold that it's true? But I can't do it. I just can't do that without this. And that's really what this boils down to, is that, okay, fine. I always admit, these things as being definitionally true when they're an analytic a priori statement. But that never gets to the issue, does that mean I'm justified because I can't do something? Or I can't do something without being a hypocrite? Or that I can't do something without contradicting myself or something like that? Then the second question, why even think that avoiding contradiction is a good thing? Do you see all the presuppositions that are loaded in these things? And the reason why nobody goes this way is because we just all agree. It's like as soon as everybody just agrees with something, oh, it's good, and we shouldn't do this, and I agree with that, they never go any further. Now, there's usually always somebody, and like Ludwig Wittgenstein says, the problem with people is they don't push the question mark down far enough. And thank God there's always somebody that's like, but is it really a good... Now, usually they kill people like that, right? Didn't they do that with Socrates? But really, is that really just... Kill that! He's the annoying guy that is taking away all our power. Does everybody follow me on that? So it just moves the question of justification back further. You're just asserting and presupposing that avoiding contradiction magically amounts to justification. And if I ask somebody, how do you know that? Because we all believe that. Oh, okay. I guess that's where the question mark stops, right? If we all just believe it, that must be the case, right? Then you realize it's another swindle. It's like, that can't be true. Why should I avoid contradiction? Everybody will give you a story, but they'll always give you another response. That's just not another justification. It's just another. And how many of you saw the tuned in to the JF debate with made by Jim Bob and Posh? It's the same sort of thing kind of happened. Like, you press them on something, we're like, well, that just sounds like a story. Well, let me give you another made-up story about my made-up story, right? And then you call them on that, and they give you another made-up story. You never get anywhere. You never get into the category of justification or knowing if anything's true. You're in storyland all the time. Just people making up more stories. Now, with these people, they're just much more sophisticated storytellers, right? They're smarter. Like, it's easier to think that, like, wow, that really sounds like it might be a justification. But then all you have to do is like, is it? And that's not hard to learn, right? But is it? You just keep asking that. So that's my first issue, is that why are a priori analytic statements justifications? Right? Oh, because if you deny it, then you end up in a contradiction. Okay, you just push it back far. Like, why is avoiding contradiction equal to justification? Because it's bad. It's bad to contradict yourself. Okay, is it? Why is that? How do we know that, right? And it seems like a priori analytic statements is another argument that I would make. They're just matters of definition. They're tautological. Does everybody know what tautological means? So let me give you a perfect example of a tautology. A is A. A pencil is a pencil. Right? It's like, this is why people always, like, if you get people in debate, sometimes they'll be like, it's axiomatic. Oh, okay, you win the debate. Sorry, I didn't know. I could have sworn that it wasn't again, they just stop it like, well, that's just tautology. That doesn't tell me, and I'm going to get into this, if it's actually true. Well, I define that's what truth is. Well, can you do that? Or I'm talking about the normative. Ought you to do that? I mean, of course, anybody can do whatever they want, but ought you to do something like that? Is that how we're going to do it? But worse, it's trivial and arbitrary. And even worse, it doesn't tell us or guarantee to tell us anything substantive about the world, if anything about the world at all. So let's say I grant everything, right? Okay, it's true by definition as far as like being an axiom or something, as an a priori analytic statement. Because I'm going to agree that all a priori analytic statements are true by definition. Let's say I agree to that. I can then go, who cares? How do I know that says anything about the world out there? Do you see, now we're in a whole other camp that they just presupposed without any justifications, is that premises 1 through 3, I would assume we're talking about contingent facts about the world, right? We don't want to just remain, because eventually he's going to jump to talk about the ontology, extramental ontology, things that exist outside of. So presumably, right? If that's deriving from premises 1, 2, 3, and then 4, that those inferences themselves could only be justified with the presupposition that our words and concepts are matching the world. Does everybody follow me on that?
Yeah, so far that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so I think that's hugely problematic. And first of all, philosophers haven't been able to solve that. You have Sellers. I mean, you have all these people and the empiricists following after Kant and stuff like that. Trying to solve this problem. I'm trying to think who Donald Davidson talks about this. What is Mind and World? Why am I blanking on it? I can remember the book, but I can't remember the author. McDowell. Mind and World, right? As the title suggests, Mind and World. And philosophers have struggled to ever answer this. How do you get out of the conceptual sphere and semantics into the empirical sphere and ontology and stuff like that? So that ain't going to do it. Okay. Now, it seems that premise 4 would follow from premises 1 through 3. Right? Do you want me to put this back up on the screen? So just we know what we're looking at. So look what 4 says. We already kind of talked a little bit about this. This explanation must involve a necessary being. So if you asked why, I think you could give two, that Leibniz would give kind of two answers. That, well, once I get, if one implies, if one entails 2 and 2 entails 3, then 3 will entail 4. Okay, why? Well, I already got 2. There's a contingent fact, namely this statement about statement 1, about all contingent facts. Okay, and then I can say either there's another contingent fact that explains that, in which case premise 2 is kind of nonsensical, because that subject right there, contingent fact, should belong to the class and not a statement about the class. That's important to see. There's something really interesting going on in number 2. There is some sort of distinction between, there is a contingent fact and then the predicate, all other contingent facts. It seems to me that 2 implies this contingent fact is not like the rest of the contingent facts. What's that thing that they always say? One of these things is not like the rest. Do you remember that? Identify. Okay, they're the same in the sense if they're contingent facts, but one of these things is not the same as these. Why? Because you have a class and all the members of that class, then you have a statement of fact about that either is simply just another member, or it kind of stands outside of that. It's the contingent fact about all the contingent facts that's not a member of the class of all contingent facts. And this is kind of reminiscent of the Bertrand-Russell paradox too, and we could possibly go into even make a critique based on that, but I won't go there. So, if with number 3 there's an explanation of fact 2, the contingent fact about the class, the members of the class of all contingent facts that's not part of that member, then because it's contingent means it's not self-explanatory. But there's nothing left to appeal to as far as explanation. Well, what if contingent fact means it has an explanation beyond itself, and I've used up all my explanations beyond itself in the class of contingent facts, then what does it leave? It leaves simply one other option. Well, if it ain't a contingent fact, it must be a necessary being. Did everybody follow me on that? I know this is pretty meta level, but it's really fun, I think. And I think it makes you sharper, too, to think that through this stuff. Did I lose people? I must have lost some people. I mean, that's some pretty meta level and sophisticated reasoning there, wasn't it? So stop me, ask me questions on that, and I'll re-explain. Hello, is anybody out there?
I didn't hear. I just came in, so I.
Oh, okay. What do we got going in the... Good, Chrissy. It's like, I've lost a long time. This stuff's difficult, huh? I'm just trying to explain why somebody would...
So
yeah.
the set of these 5 statements is included in the 5 statements itself.
Let me do another, let me do like 2, maybe if I write it out. Can you see me writing stuff out right now on YouTube?
There's a little delay, so I'm not sure if...
Let's see.
Yeah, I can see it. So I guess the question becomes, which one of these 5 statements encapsulates the set itself?
Yeah, this is like set theory, right? So I'm at another set. So 2 prime is this contingent fact, namely number 2, about the class of all contingent facts, is not a member of that class. But it is still a contingent fact. Now, that's why I said we could just refute. I think this is implicit within 2. That's why we could make a Bertrand Russell paradox and critique that. Sort of like all Cretans are liars. And it is self-referential, right? In that sense. But there's a paradox in there that seems to be self-refuting. I'll say that for another day, just saying it's implicit. So all I'm saying, there is an explanation of... premise 2, and it isn't another contingent. Oops. Let's just put this fact, because we used all of them up. All right, I'm making it easier. Does that make sense? There's an explanation of this fact Number 2, I should add this, because contingent means another explanation, and it isn't another contingent fact because we used all of them up. That's and then I could put, if it isn't another contingent fact, then this explanation must involve the necessary being. Does that make sense? So I just kind of unpacked and you have to do this in philosophy and logic. Like, there's all this implicit stuff that's packed into these premises, and you're kind of doing an analytic thing where you're breaking it out, or like, what's all being said in here? And I have to see what's all being said in here, because otherwise I won't know if it's actually a good argument. I'll be missing something. Whoa, what did I just do? Hopefully that explanation made it easier. Okay, what's the problem with that? Well, this itself is an a priori analytic statement, right? Which just gets us back to the other point. And also, right, since this implies that, this number 4 could only be, I can only assert that it's true and be justified in that, and that therefore 4 is also justification if 1, 2, and 3 are. But we haven't got that. We have no reasons to believe these are true for the right reasons, i.e. that we have any justification for that. Furthermore, 4 is, if you notice, already implies a disjunction. Either it's a contingent fact as an explanation, or it isn't. So I could just ask the question too, why should I think that disjunction what follows from a disjunction is a justification? They're just things that we take for granted as justifications that aren't established as justifications. All right, the last point is this necessary being is God. What? Like, that's the biggest jump. First of all, that might assume it's not immediately clear. What if there's multiple necessary beings, right? And Aquinas goes through this as well, but it requires further justification. And although I might agree with some of his premises, I don't agree that he's holding them for the right reasons. And so those explanations of the explanations of why there can't be multiple beings that are necessary beings isn't a justification. Second, why is it God? And it's going to go back, because that's a priori, that's what it means to be God. This is exactly what Aquinas says. And this is what all men call God. Okay, if everybody calls it, then I guess that's true, right? And we're justified in believing that God's a necessary being. Critique number 3, all of that assumes and presupposes a univocal meaning of God that's understood generally across the board. that's generally accepted. And let me call that the fallacy of univocalness or univocacy or something like that. It's what, if you've heard some of my other streams, and I've given this paper to Jay to read, and then Jay and I did a stream on Garby's paper. It's what Garby calls the theistic fallacy. And that is already this presupposition, and I believe unfounded, that God, the term God, which is really a common name and not a proper name. So like a proper name would be San Francisco, or Father Deacon Ananias in Montana, or something like that. God is not. God is like American, or I'm trying to think, city. They're common names. So they might have similarities, right? Like, Americans all have these different similarities or something like that. But what the problem that Garby shows is that he calls it the rational core doctrine. And this is the assumption that, well, let's just strip off all the excess of whatever additional things put onto God, and we'll find that there's a common denominator that, and even Richard Schwinburner's Orthodox, God help him, argues this. The common core that, therefore, all monotheistic religions believe in the same God. It's just, decorations and ornaments they put on that are incorrect, right? But let's just strip all of that. And what do we mean by God? It's already implicit in also the giveaway is that God is a necessary being. Oh, well, yeah, that's what all people mean by God. Well, everybody? Well, all the monotheistics, once you just strip off all the ornaments and stuff like that. That's called the rational core doctrine, and that assumes there is a God who's omniscient, omnipotent, eternal, free, good, creator and sustainer of the universe, a person worthy of worship and obedience, and therefore this God is the same for all monotheistic religions. Did you guys see on somebody posted on Twitter, what's his name? E. Michael Jones. Muslims and Christians worship the same God. What's the mistake there? It's the exact mistake that Leibniz is doing. It's the exact mistake that Garby's pointing out. It's a theistic fallacy. It assumes that there's a common denominator. And then this gets into issues 2 of what we call in philosophy and philosophy of language intentionality. That my words have intention. My words and thoughts have intention, and I don't mean like desire or purpose, but directedness. They're about something, whereas this Zeviacan isn't about anything, right? It's just is, right? It's not directed. There's no aboutness or intentionality to. Then a second question comes up that, well, do they hit the object that they're supposed to be about? And oftentimes they don't. And then philosophers unpack, like, well, what's the problem? Why does it sometimes hit it and it doesn't? I would give you an example of the term Aristotle. You're thinking about so I have the thought Aristotle. So it's about someone. And you're like, well, who is this person, Aristotle? It's like, well, he's Greek. He was good looking and actually came from a wealthy family too. It's like, okay. So now you're kind of narrowing in, right? He's Greek. Oh, he was smart too. Does everybody know who I'm talking about? And you're like, yeah, Aristotle the philosopher. And it's like, no, I was talking about Aristotle and Onassis, right? So it's like, well, it's interesting. In both those cases, we used a name, we had a thought, and we even had various common attributes. And let's say we had two people thinking the exact same proposition. Aristotle was a Greek man who was good looking, from a wealthy family, and was very smart. So you both have the same propositions. One's hitting over here and one's hitting over there. So then you can ask, well, why? It's like, well, because you didn't get enough. So then it gets into questions of, okay, well, what's enough? Like, where is it? What's the criteria for that? And so it's even more difficult because those are what we call, the way that those things are determined empirically is very different than what Garrity talks about mental concepts, right? That doesn't mean that he's saying that God and mental concepts are non-existent. He's saying they're within a different category, and therefore determining whether they're hitting a referent at all, whether hitting the same referent, is going to be determined differently than the way that I gather attributes and confirm through experience and memory and testimony and stuff like that. An empirical object that's not transcendent, that's not a pure mental object or anything like that. Does that make sense? So I don't even know what's my critique? I don't even know what he's talking about. I don't know if that term God is what's in your mind, let alone it actually even hitting anything out there. Because what I would say, and I make this argument, Garrity makes this argument, the Muslim and the Jew, their talk about God doesn't even hit anything. It's not talking about, there is no such thing as they define it, as they understand by God, that is out there. And that sounds really controversial, but there's some sophisticated arguments to actually show that, and to assume otherwise would get you into what's called the theistic fallacies, the substitutivity of identicals, irrespective of epistemic and semantic context. So I said that word once to, where was I? I was back at the Episcopate, and there was a really cool guy. He actually watches this, and Jade. I was talking to him about this, and I was like, well, that's the fallacy of the substitutivity of identicals and the lack of epistemic and semantic context. And he's like, what did you just say? He's all, say it again. I'm like, because it's a tongue twister too, huh? Well, that's the fallacy of the substitutivity of the identicals in terms of epistemic and semantic context. Everybody knows that, but
it's just word salad.
Yeah, that's what I was getting.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Were you thinking that?
Yeah, that's the common, like, atheist trope or whatever. Oh, you're just speaking word salad.
You know what? Somebody came and said, I don't remember where it was. It was somebody. Oh, it was on social media somewhere. You see how my intention must have hit some object. I just make it. I'm like a. What do you call it? Tarot card. Like, what do they call those people that do? A reader. You just make your prediction so general that it's got to hit something, right? I was on social media, and this guy, I made some objection to him, and I remember what it was now. It was on theodicy. Why can't... why come God exist if a bad thing happened, right? I'm like, oh, here we go. And he tells me about the tsunami and stuff like this, and so I presup him, and he's not getting it. He just keeps going. He's like, so I see you didn't answer my question. Now, just like with Matt Slick, there might be a reason why I'm not answering your question directly, because there's some fundamentals that need to be worked out first, right? Don't you think so? Before we even get there, we need to get some stuff squared away, right? That you're not in a position to be making any of these knowledge statements, normative statements, or ethical. Once you get there, then I'll actually give you the explanation I did. And then it's like, word salad, right? So I came back to him with, I'm like, just because you say something doesn't make it true. Just because you say something's word salad doesn't make it word salad. Then I gave him an analogy. I said, what's worse and what's more idiotic, that's like a child going into a calculus professor's lecture. And it's like, so the professor's explaining derivatives, and the child laughs and says, word salad. Oh, word salad. Does that make it true? Is the child in a position to tell the calculus professor explaining derivatives that his explanations are word salad? I don't think so. But it is funny, yeah. The retort of the epistemic despot, right? When you don't have any arguments or any thoughts, what do you say? Word salad. What are some other ones that people throw out? You. You.
That's just
So
like
you're wrong, man.
bro.
Reality is reality.
Yeah, reality is reality. It's axiomatic. There's a
My truth.
yeah, my truth.
That's just like your opinion, bro.
Yeah, it's just your opinion. Well, you could get the stuff Jay gets and be like, I'll fight you. It's like, okay. And it went straight out of the ring of like dialogue and argumentation and right into a boxing ring. Ladies and gentlemen, weighing at, I've heard that one. Word pudding. That's funny. Number salad.
How much can you bench press?
How much can you best friends? There was one the other day, I pooped my pants. Where's Jay? I want to get Jay on the phone. Like, I thought Jay would come in and help me out with this stuff. Wait a minute. My subdeacon's writing me saying, we're wearing gold? Guess that's right. It's Ascension tomorrow, so it wouldn't be blue. I was all stoked that get to bust my blue vestments out. Blue's my favorite for the Dormition. But Ascension's gold. Well, you know what you do in this situation? It's not an either or, it's a both and you bring both pairs of vestments and then let God sort it out, or the priest. That's what I'm doing. But like, Father, shouldn't we really wear blue? I bet it is gold, though. I'm going off on a tangent, aren't I? Were there any questions about the fallacy of univocacy? There's another tongue twister. Well, that's a fallacy of univocacy. Everybody knows that. Or what Garby calls the theistic fallacy. So I think it's a pretty good treatment of refuting Leibniz's very clever and sophisticated argument. But it gets to this question about justification. And I've actually brought this up with you guys, the Chisholm's problem, the criteria. You noticed exactly this same thing happening with this argument, this Leibnizian cosmological argument. Two questions that should come to our mind, as Chisholm points out. What are we justified in believing? Don't we all want to know that? What are we justified in believing? Am I justified in believing that it's good to avoid contradiction? Second question is, what makes our beliefs justified? So if I said, well, yeah, I believe that it is good to avoid contradiction. Is that belief justified? Well, what does it make? What makes it justified? See, it pushes the question back. And Chisholm points out, well, wait a minute. There's kind of some circularity here going on. How do I answer number one, what are we justified in believing, without having to answer to number two, what makes our beliefs justified, right? Don't I already have to have that number two in order to assert one, to be able to answer one? And I can't come up with an answer. What makes our beliefs justified already implies that I have an answer to what are we justified in believing. And so there's a sort of kind of epistemic bootstrapping. Each one's holding up the previous one. But then you're asking, like, well, what's holding any of them up? Well, you know, the number one's holding up number two. What's holding up number two? Number one. What's holding up number one? Number two. Right? It's like, yeah, but what's holding up? Do you see? These are the conversations that we're getting into. What are we justified in believing? Well, this. Yeah, but what makes that justified? We'll refer back to number one. Yeah, but I'm asking about number one. Well, that's why I told you to. What it reminds me of those comedians from the 50s. What was the two that would do these kind of things? Well, I'm telling you, it's number one. Yeah, but I'm asking about number one. That's why I referred you to number two. I know, but two. Wait a minute. What about number two? We'll go see number one. But I'm asking about number one. Yeah, go see number one said go see number two. And you're just like, you're not going anywhere. It's
like a Groucho Marx routine.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's a Groucho Marx kind of routine. That's what's going on here, is that you just never get an answer. Now, this leads into transcendental arguments for the existence of God. And so some might want to ask, well, why are you in a better position? I'm not. I'm not claiming I am. I'm not claiming any of you are. We'll all be in this kind of this problem of criterion, or there's also the Munchausen's trilemma. Yeah, Abbott and Costello do this too. That's right. The Munchausen's trilemma. And we have to ask, well, what is the nature that makes it that way? What's the nature that makes it a problem? And we can see with this problem of criteria here, I can actually just share this so you guys can look at. I need to put my other. Let's see. No, not that one. don't know why it's not showing there. The problem criterion, so you can just look at that. Just look at it. Just standing there. Epistemic bootstrapping itself. We can ask, well, I can't solve this problem, but we perhaps might be able to identify what might actually, why is it a problem? That certainly seems modest and reasonable. Well, it seems to be, first, it shows that nobody's in an epistemic privilege position. If one were in an epistemic privilege position, they'd be able to answer both 1 and 2. And as all philosophers and epistemologists admit, none of us can be in an epistemic privilege position, no matter what Descartes thinks that he can be in an epistemic privilege position. Well, what would an epistemic privilege position look like? Well, not finite. There seems to be something kind of finite in the very nature that I can't answer 1 without 2 and 2 without 1. What does finite mean? Limited, right? Like, is that not just a perfect semantic definition of the meaning was I'm limited, right? I can't do one without the other, and I can't get the other without the one. I'm limited. So we can identify that. I'm not in a position to know. So I can certainly say I'm not omniscient. Right? So we can start to identify that why is it doesn't matter what position we make. We're never going to get out of this. It doesn't matter if it's in infantism, if it's coherentism, if it's foundationalism, or whatever other ism you want to eventually come up with to the nth degree in the future. The problem's the same. It's that you're not in a position to know. You're finite by definition of the epistemic problem that you're in, and you're not omniscient. But not my position, one who is in a position to know who's omniscient, infinite, not bounded, right, is in an epistemic privileged position, says so. Does that make it true? Not necessarily. It pushes the question back. But then this is where we can go, well, what's the options? What do I have to work with here? Well, at the most basic level, that's God who has revealed himself, supposedly, who's saying he's omniscient in a position. It's something new. It's fundamentally a different category. Whether that's true or not is something that we're all asking about.
Yeah, it's like not another fact, but an actual being who's
it's not
telling
another
us
person
this.
in another system, and that's why I always say that it's either theonomous, the one who's giving the story, because there is a story. Let's just call everything a story. Now we're going to get to, are there true and justified stories, right? Just because we say story doesn't mean that it necessarily implies the story's been given. All bunch of different stories. And the story has been given about one who claims to be a trinity, that claims to be personal, that claims to be in a position to know, that created the world with purpose and intention, that established the heavens and earth and the laws and the planets, right, that they abide by, right, the rising of the sun and the moon and the setting of the sun, and as we read in our wonderful, in the beginning of Vespers with it's such a beautiful psalm, Psalm 104, who laid the foundations of the earth so that it should not be moved forever. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the voice of your thunder they went up over the mountains. They went down into the valleys, right? Gives drink to every beast in the field, right? What I'm going through is that there's an account of nature, the regularity of nature. He causes the grass to grow. He's the cause for the cattle, the vegetation for the service of man. The trees of the Lord are full of sap, right? He's going into, it's talking about the biological laws, right? We have an account for this. This is all being laid out in Psalm 104. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all, right? The one who's in a position to know.
And the same thing is at the beginning of liturgy, right? The petitions, they go through the different strata of creation and all their different incarnations that we offer up to God to heal.
When I do the in peace, let us pray to the Lord for the peace of the world, for the salvation, that right. And so, why come this and why come that, right? There's an account for that, right? Well, everybody gives an account. And so, we have an account for why the things do what they do, why there's laws, why there's knowledge, the conditions for that. And then also the regularity of nature, why the future will resemble the past. All these different things. So you could just start basic and be like, well, what is the other position? Atheism? What's atheism? There is no personal... It's the denial of everything that I just said. So at least, just pedagogically, let's just eliminate that. Okay, is a story. And what I'm going to show is, in that story is not possible. There is no story with that story. Why? Because it's the denial that behind everything, right? Because Leibniz was right. He's getting intuitively at something. There's got to be an explanation. Has to stop somewhere. Because just as we saw, is we're trying to get explanations for justifications. What is a justification? If I just keep going, well, let me just give you another justification that I can't justify in itself. I'm going to pass the buck to another thing that I'm pretending to be the justification. And you ask, well, why is that a justification? And I go, either I'm going in circles or I'm going back infinitely. In which case we see you don't get anywhere. So you know that the buck has to stop somewhere. There's going to be an ultimate explanation. An ultimate story, right? Where you don't appeal to anything else. It's the thing by which explains everything else. And particularly with justification and knowledge and ethics and morality and different stuff like that. So what is behind everything? What ultimately goes back on the denial of the Orthodox and theistic position is there is no personal being. There is no Trinity. There is no personal being that purposely and lovingly, intentionally created things the way that they should be. The laws of nature, the laws of physics, knowledge, the mechanisms that allow us these things and allow us to be able to find these things as well. Well, what's the opposite of purpose? So if I said I crashed my car on purpose, and it's like, no, you didn't. It was an accident. It's accidentalism. That's the atheistic position. Accident is their ultimate epistemic principle. That's what it rolls back to and ends. Ultimately, it's accident that explains. But then that's an oxymoron. That makes a narrative impossible. If a narrative's just ultimately explain, your story is an accident, right? It's just all accident. It's not a story. What does it mean to say the accidental laws of physics? We already have a notion that we believe, all of us, that law precludes accident, right? That it's even further than it's not just even correlation, right? We believe it's not an accidental correlation. They're correlated in a law-like, right? It's like, well, then it excludes accident. So it's an oxymoron to be like, well, my explanation of all of that, my justification, is accidentalism. It's like, well, then there is no explanation. There is no laws. What does it mean to be accidental knowledge? Well, knowledge precludes accident. We've gone over this with the Gettier case, right? With the fourth condition, as a response to what Gettier shows, that it's not sufficient just to have true justified belief to be knowledge. There's got to be a fourth condition. And a lot of people says, well, we all know, well, it can't be an accident, right? I can't have knowledge of things and I arrived at that accidentally. But this is what the atheist is saying. So what that means is there is no objection. There is nothing that can be said. The story's here. God is the Lord, and he has revealed himself, as the psalm says. And the very meaning of God is determined within that story, as I always argue, the Orthodox paradigm, right? God's not just like, oh, I'm just going to throw out, these little clues in nature, and then I'm going to go hide, and then I'm going to watch you, who are not in an epistemic privileged position and can't provide justification for your justification criteria, try to blindly put together all these little cookie crumbs that I'm not even connected to in any way, and put together a piece and story about me, my existence, and what the term God even means. That's not what God does, and that's insane. That's natural theology for you, and I show, like, in many ways, like, how that always ends in disaster. The very meaning of God is Trinity. The very meaning is the energy, right? This is what, you can't divorce those, right? So I can't just be like, oh, I just mean a monotheistic God, right? When I'm forming this disjunct against atheism. It's like, no, it's the story's here, and this is what the term God means, because it's contained within the story about what that word means and who he is. And so what are you going to use to object against that? Now, somebody says, well, isn't that circular? Isn't your critique is that all these people are viciously circular? Now, what I would say is that, again, we could go back to kind of the similar questions about, well, why is circularity bad? Oh, no, you're saying circularity is bad. I didn't say all circularity is bad. Let me give you an example. Or illegitimate, right? Illegitimate, you can't use circularity. I didn't say that. I said epistemic bootstrapping. And then maybe we would call that vicious circularity. And what I mean is, it's not doing the work that you want it to do, right? It's not good, it's vicious, right? As opposed to virtuous or something like that. Okay, would you think that this is bad? An illicit move? Could you tell me about words? But like, yeah, let me explain to you. You're using words to tell about words and explain what words are. It's like, you're being circular. What would you guys say? Is that illicit? Is every use of circularity illicit?
In their worldview, it possibly could be, yes.
Well, then we just do exactly what we did with Leibniz.
Well, some smart aleck will be like, "Oh, I'm gonna speak in sign language, talk about words, or her."
Yeah, and then we just be like, those are words and hands.
Yeah.
Your hands are giving words. So, I mean, words can be put in many different forms: written form, audible, through hieroglyphics, sign language or whatever. But if they do bring that up, you just say, well, what's your justification that all circularity is bad? And why is it that you use circular, or like, why are you a hypocrite? Explain your hypocrisy. Use circularity all the time. You use words to talk about words, and then tell me you can't use circularity. So isn't that kind of weird on your own principles? So not all, I mean, all of this is to show that, like, in principle, circularity isn't bad. And it reminds me exactly of something that always occurs when I'm teaching logic. When we're going over the informal fallacies of relevance. So, like, let me just pop up. Appeal to the people, appeal to force, appeal to pity. Ad hominem, appeal to the person, etc. A lot of people think that any appeal to authority, any appeal to a person's character is always wrong. Why? Oh, because it says so in the book, right? Because it has the name. It's like, no. There's something that people agree to that's a non sequitur. They call it fallacies irrelevant. It doesn't relevantly. It might psychologically pertain to something, but it doesn't logically pertain. And so they name it something. Okay. The name doesn't make the thing wrong. Things that are wrong can be named. And therefore, everything that could possibly fall under that name isn't wrong. Does that make sense? Because people will be like, oh, you can't appeal to authority. It's like, why? Because it said in the logic book it's wrong. It's like, no, it didn't. It just said when you're doing it in a certain way, it's wrong. So, circularity or question begging, question begging I would definitely say is wrong, but circularity itself isn't always wrong, just like appeal to authority or ad hominems, right? We've got to talk about people's bad moral character if it's relevant in a court case. Like, somebody's not going to stand and be like, oh, that's an ad hominem, you can't talk about. It's like, well, that's what's under investigation, is whether their character is trustworthy or not. Does everybody follow me on that?
Well, especially in an Orthodox context, because your bad character affects your ability to perceive anything at all, right?
Yeah. So, I know Jay will also say, like, everything at the paradigm level ends up being circular. And so we don't have a problem with circularity. Now, people misunderstood that and said, well, coherentism isn't circle, it's more like a web. And it's like, no, you're missing the point. These are meta statements about the paradigm as a whole. that's what Jay was referring to, will inevitably be circular, and you don't, in principle, object just because it's doing that. We're going to object because it perhaps doesn't accomplish what it sets out to do. So let me give the coherence example. Coherentism, you could phrase a statement about coherentism. Coherentism is true and justified if and only if coherentism is true and provides justification. Does everybody understand that? Do you see that that was a second order reflexive statement about coherentism or epistemic holism as a whole, right? That's circular. It's self-referential, right? And in a sense, it's tautological. It's a justification if it's a justification. That's what Jay means by everything's circular at the paradigm level. He doesn't mean the paradigm itself is a circle or something like that. Some guy came on and was like, well, coherentism isn't a circle, it's a web. And I'm like, are you obtuse? Like, do you not get what we're saying? That at the paradigm level, the statements about the paradigm itself. And the same can be said about foundationalism. The paradigm of foundationalism is true and is a justification if foundationalism is true and provides a justification. Do you see I made a second order reflexive statement about the paradigm itself? That's circularity. Now, is that the problem because it did the circle, right? No, I'd say that the problem is the nature of it. That we're back to, yeah, but how do I know that? And that's why it's going to push it into the exact same place that we went to. You can't answer that question of criteria from a limited, admitted lack of omniscience and lack of privileged epistemic position. Okay? And therefore, that sort of circularity becomes problematic because of the nature of the things involved. Now, is the nature of the thing involved in the theonomous story the same as what's going on, or the same nature, admittedly, and I'm just speaking definitionally, of what we're just talking about here with limited, finite? No. And if that's the problem, that's what causes the epistemic circularity in those instances to be a problem. Not just because it's circular, because of the nature of the things involved. That should be pretty straightforward. I don't know why. So there's only one other way to go. And that's the God and is the one, the Lord who has revealed himself. Now somebody might want to know, well, why come not Islam and Judaism, strict monotheism, or Hinduism, or Mormonism, or something like that, right?
Father Deacon, we're having a hard time hearing you. It might be the distance from the mic.
Oh, sorry. Do I have to repeat everything again?
No, it was just a little bit low, but I got it.
Okay, so let's just... What I would say, though, is that now you do have an account, right? There is no other account. People say, like, oh, you presuppositionalists against evidence. It's like, no, we're not. It's a grounding problem. Right now we have actually a grounding in which we can look at evidence. God is not distant. He is the Lord and he has revealed himself, and he's actually present in his divine energies. I can actually look and be like, this is the God who revealed, like, the Islamic God is not the God who revealed himself. And furthermore, too, within those paradigms, too, just like the atheistic paradigm, you're going to be having things, because again, it's simply just another man-made speculative project. You're going to be adding in things there that would make knowledge, ethics, and meaningful statements impossible. Does that make sense? Anyways, I think that was good. Let's open up for Q&A. Let's see if anybody gave me any super chats. Yes, I'm going to read the super chats. So, Kid Gamer donates $1, says, how do we do inference in your epistemology? Not my epistemology, remember. I didn't make this up. And you have to see that. Do we justify God and then say God's revelation through the church make theology make sense, or do we actually infer Orthodox theology from philosophical axioms outside the pure revelation? Okay, so this goes back to, and reminds me that I should have actually said, I prefer not to use, like, if the triune God and his revelation of and what's contained in that is what makes knowledge possible. It's a necessary condition for knowledge. What that means is that I found the epistemic standard, the ultimate epistemic standard. That means there's not some separate standard by which, well, how do I judge that that's actually true? Do you see the issue here? Suppose we're not even talking about God. Suppose it was possible that you found the ultimate epistemic standard. So now that you could actually provide the criteria for your justification criteria, you could solve the Chisholm problem. Let's call it X. Now you've grounded. Right? Now I can make the inferences and I can do these various things, right? And then and you say, well, how did I find that? And you said, the impossibility to the contrary, right? Meaning, no other way can actually do that. If it's the only way, if it's an either or, right, and the others don't work, then that's the only one that you have to go by. Then somebody says, yeah, but how do you know that? How do you judge that that's the ultimate epistemic standard? When the X is the ultimate epistemic standard by which you judge, wouldn't you think that they're missing something? It's like, well, there is no, if it's an ultimate epistemic standard, if it's primary, then if I appeal to something else, it's not ultimate, is it? Which just gets us back into everything that we've been doing tonight, that like, well, then how do I know that that's a standard? So that's what I mean. And then that leads to nowhere. I can't go anywhere. I can never provide the justification. So that's why it was the impossibility of the contrary. It's either this or it's nothing. Okay? And if I assert anything else, then I'm pretending that I have actually established what I can't do, or there's something above the ultimate epistemic standard, in which case it's not. It's not ultimate. It's not primary. So to respond back to, do we justify God? No, we don't. Is it circular? Because I would say that no, the triune God of Orthodoxy is the justification for our justification criteria. We got it. And we didn't do it. He gave it to us because that was the only way to do it. So if we say, yeah, but how do we know that? Then we've returned back to the same problem. We have to go through the same arguments again. It's like you're missing something. It's like you're not in a position to know. And there can't be something higher than the ultimate epistemic standard, and if that's arrived by that's the only option, then we have no objections that there is anything else. In other words, in order to justify anything, we have to have the justification, the ultimate criteria for the justification for our justification criteria. So what I would rather, so then somebody says, well, isn't that viciously circular? Well, no, because God, the problem wasn't circularity itself, it was the nature of the things involved, and this is categorically something different. And I would prefer not to even use circular. It's self-authenticating. That's a better way. Then it just gets all of that talk out of the way. Why just call it? No, it's not really circular. It's self-authenticating. What do I mean by that? There is no other standard by which we authenticate that God is the criteria for one's justification criteria, that God is the necessary conditions for the possibility of knowledge, because it is the criteria. And therefore, us even knowing that it's a criteria, the criteria is self-authenticating and revealing that about itself. So, if we say that, do we actually infer Orthodox theology from philosophical axioms outside of pure revelation? No, because then we just say that, how do I know my philosophy is true? And then, how do I adjust it? We're back to the exact same problem that we just outlined there. So, it's not our thoughts and our systems from an epistemic disadvantage, finite and impossible position that we begin with in order to establish God. What does God do? God's like, you're in an impossible position, so let me help you out because I'm not in the impossible position. God's first. Personhood's always first. Now notice in the West, it's always, I'm first, my thoughts are first, my thoughts about the world, and then I'll get to God. Now that I got God, like, you can help me and save me and do all these other things. Which was exactly Blaise Pascal's critique of Descartes and the Western Project, too. So, how do we do inferences in your epistemology? Well, it's only, not my epistemology, it's the Trinity's epistemology, it's the theonomous epistemology that's the only thing that can even give a coherent account and justify inference in the first place. So that's how I do it. I hope that answers. For $1, Nicoforos sends $5. The word salad would be better with some ranch dressing. Yes. With my transcendental argument for the existence of God, ranch dressing with... No. Let's see. Send some more super chats if you want. Otherwise, let's take... And if you haven't liked and subscribed, I need to get my subscribers just like hit plateau. Small brain donated $5. If your brain is just not capable of understanding why any of this makes sense, but you still believe in God informally, will your soul be condemned because you didn't necessarily believe in the right version of God? Orthodoxy. So, great question. If you remember, St. Paul says, all men know there is a God. This is Romans, I'm trying to remember. Help me out here. Is it Romans? I just quoted this the other day. Romans 1:22. I think it is.
What are you trying to quote?
Romans 22. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. For God hath shown it to them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. Right? Being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, now it's interesting, the Roman Catholic's going to think that, like, oh, this is a cosmological argument. But it says men, all men. That includes children, right? Like, are we knowing God because we went through my lecture? Are 3-year-olds grasping what I'm saying? Are they doing cosmological argument? Is that how they know God? No. They know through the things that are made. Why? Because God's present in them in his divine energies. He's there. He's actually fully there. The distinction is his energies are not his essence, but he's immanent within. So that everyone's without excuse. Because when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, i.e. they became philosophers. And their foolish heart was darkened, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man and birds. So that's exactly what philosophy is, right? The what, like, well, let me tell you how. But that's our noose. Like, we don't know God through reading books. And this is what's great about orthodoxy. In the West, we'll read something like, oh, now I know it, right? Now I know. But Christianity's not Western. It's Eastern. Christ was an Easterner. The apostles were Easterners, right? And the Bible talks about, for example, to know is concrete experiential, right? Like when the Bible says, oh, he knew a woman, that means like they had sex, right? They knocked boots, and it wasn't, as Father Russell always says, it's not like, oh, he read her resume. I know my wife, right? We know other people. Why? Because you read books on them? Does that make any sense? Oh, because they sent me the resume and I read articles about. That's not.
When Jesus said, "I never knew you," at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah.
It means. It's like if somebody came into my house and was like, "Hey, buddy," and I'm like, "What are you doing here?" And be like, "Oh yeah, we're friends." Like, and he starts telling me all this stuff because he's watched all my YouTube videos and read my articles. What would I say? Like, I don't know you. Get out of my house. Wouldn't I say that? You and I didn't make a life together. You reading about me, watching my YouTube videos is not to know me. To know is to have a physical encounter with God. I don't know my wife through my mind, right? The personal encounter is a face-to-face, noose-to-noose, right? Now, that doesn't mean the mind's excluded, or the mind can't help and aid in those things, right? And join along for the ride. But that's not how we know. We know persons, and God's a person. He's three persons. In a direct and immediate sense. This is why it can only be in orthodoxy. Why? Because in the West, there's no doctrine of the energies. So they have no philosophical or theological way to explain how you can have in a coherent way, how you can have an immediate experience with God and know him when he's utterly transcendent, right? Now they'll say, but like, oh, he incarnated, right? but you don't have a coherent way of saying it because you don't have the energies, right? Like, well, how? Oh, it's mediated through cause and effects, or it's nonsensical. So it's only an orthodoxy. So I would say you're not saved through a theology test. You don't come to know to God. That's why we always say in orthodoxy, come taste and see that the Lord is good. I don't say don't come taste and see. It's not that important. Just go read Orthodox dogmatic theology here, and you'll be fine. You'll find God, right? Now, it's not an either or, it's a both and, right? But it's first and foremost, none of this is going to do anything. You're going to know anything unless you actually meet him. And the only way to meet him, right, is in the heart. So all this philosophy stuff, right, all these theories, all this pretended autonomy, all these system buildings, all these Tower of Babels intellectually that we build, keeps us from knowing God. That's why in our prayers we try to empty all that from our thoughts, right, our head and our mind, so that every man knows God in his heart. And on Judgment Day, that's what you're going to stand face to face on the awesome Judgment Day. There's not going to be any excuse, right? And you're going to be accountable for what you were given and the things that you did to either strengthen that relationship or distance yourself from. I don't know how it's all going to work out. I just know it's coming. And it's an awesome and dreadful Judgment Day that's going to be terrifying. It's terrifying to stand face to face. We're often bowing and prostrating and everything. But to stand face to face before the Master and King and the Judge will be truly, and the standard of all, will be truly terrifying. Anyways, hopefully that helps answer. Kid Gamer. Oh, we got a bunch more. Jake donated one to, how do we know God is telling the truth in his revelation and is not going back on what he said? How do we know the nous is a reliable faculty? What if all divine revelation is ultimately a lie? Jake kind of answered this well the other day, where it was kind of like how do we know we're not living in a simulation thing? Well, in order to even give the hypothetical conditional, which is an if-then, or the hypothetical this, any credence, guess what we have? We have to be in an epistemic... We have to have some epistemic grounding. So, the question isn't... So God is the epistemic grounding. So the question is nonsensical to say, can truth and justification ever cease being... Can be both true and the justification cease being truth and justification? That doesn't make any sense. It's a nonsensical... So the question is really not... There is no question with how do I know if God's telling the truth, right? If you found God, that is the truth. It's nonsensical to, and then it also would presuppose you had some epistemic standard to judge. So the question really is it God? Right? Is it God that's talking to you? Not is it possible for God to lie, or how do I know God's telling the truth? The question is, how do I know it's God? I mean, doesn't Christ talk about this too? Many will come in my name, claiming to. And so the question about is really how do we know is a cleansing of the nous? And then that leads to your next question, well, how do you know the nous is the reliable faculty, which just moves us back to the exact same stuff that we were going over. Well, I just push it back. Well, how do you establish what's reliable? Right? And a reliable faculty. From your non-epistemic privileged position that's engaged in the problem of criteria that makes knowledge impossible, or the only other position, God, who is the Lord that has revealed himself and tells us that the nous is the reliable faculty by which he communicates. That's how I'd answer. Kid Gamer, if we don't justify anything from philosophical axioms of orthodoxy, how do we justify things like the doctrine of essence, energies, distinctions, uncreated grace, or the doctrine of the nous? Well, maybe it'll just be easier to be like, we don't justify it. God does. Because we can't. Because then we're back into the epistemic bootstrapping and the problem of criterion. So if you don't get that, like, we can't, like, we have to understand that before, and then it'll make sense of your question. So maybe you're not grasping that there is no any other justification. It's not us justifying. It's the one who's in a position to know to justify justifies it. And there is no other possibility. That's the short. Questions from Discord on that. Does that make sense to you guys? Is there any questions about? Somebody asks about, this question always comes up about coherentist. If we have an orthodox presupposition, can we use coherentist-like arguments just like, well, we can use evidentialist arguments? Yes, like, again, we use evidence and we can use stuff from coherentists without being evidentialist or coherentist. And again, the problem with coherentists is, why should I think that coherentism is a justification? It never answers that, and it can't. Now, once you get a justification for your justification criteria, not one that you justify, but one who's in a position to actually justifies for you, then God, who is in the epistemic privileged position, who reveals certain things, you stand above in some sense. You're not limited by the paradigms. And Demetrius Stanley talks about this because orthodoxy never married itself to any particular philosophy. It was freed from that. It stands above. That you can be like, yeah, there was something right about that. There's something right about what the coherentists say. I'd even say there's something right about what foundationalists say and the way that, propositions can, not everything, but inferences and stuff like that. There's so good question. Well, it's almost 9:00. I've been going for how many hours? 2 hours and 30 minutes. I don't want to stay up too late because if you're on the old calendar, it's Annunciation. Tomorrow. Did I say is that right? Annunciation, Assumption. I always mess up on the two. Transfiguration. Transfiguration, right? Man, my brain's falling. That's weird. 1 second. I'm gonna check something out. Yeah, I have to double check. Transfiguration. Why did I say assumption? Like, I talked to some other clergy. I'm like, you ever make that mistake? Like, you start throwing in there like all the time. I'm like, what the heck?
This is a problem with autonomous epistemology. Showcasing it.
Questions, guys? That was pretty intense, man. What do you think? We didn't get any any debaters.
I really liked your summary of basically the argumentation of the Orthodox worldview versus the atheistic worldview. You gave a really good summary of it. That was awesome.
Nice, thanks, man.
Father Deacon, did you happen to see the Sam Harris clip that's been running around on Twitter today?
No. Let me just pop up my... Actually, didn't go much on Twitter today.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on it, but I'll post it in the VC text.
Nobody to debate? Or do you like Jay Dyer? Catholics, Muslims, atheists, pagans. Now's your time to tell me I'm wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about. Is that what he says?
That's exactly what he says.
But pagan means earthbound, though.
Oh my gosh.
David, John, and Paul didn't exist.
I can't tell if people are actually serious sometimes. Like, some stuff's just like so ridiculous, and I'm like, what? And you know, people think that Jay's me, but it's like, but you don't understand. You're just jumping in. I mean, there's years of this stuff, right? And he immediately knows. Like, he's better than I am. I'm like, I'm probably like, too willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. But he'll always be like, well, here we go. When somebody's like, Mr. Dyer, Mr. J. Dyer. And he's like, here we go. Yeah. He knows, and he's like, oh, this guy's banned, right? And he's like, oh, he's so mean. I'm like, actually, he's not mean. He's got the boundaries, and he knows and experience. It's like when I did the Matt Slick debate, and I saw some comments like, oh, I love the debate, but it was just awful that, like, Jake came in and, like, what was it? Goblin Boomer.
I've been hearing your stupid arguments for 20 years, man.
Bro, God, you're a goblin boomer. You're a demon tard or something. What was the... And people were like, that was mean. And it's like, first of all, the debate was over. It was done. So he didn't come in and break into the debate. The debate was over. We had ended it, and I went to use the restroom, and I was like, Jay, you can talk. Like, I thought it was just rolling into something else. It was like, who is this man? And then people were like, that was so mean. It's like, it's not mean. I'm like, those guys have history between, and it's not wrong to be like, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of your shenanigans and your tomfoolery. That's what I would have said. I would have been like, shenanigans and tomfoolery. My wife's saying, time. Let's see.
I do remember that debate distinctly. Like, can we just go to the Word of God? When you're trying to make an argumentation for, like, all right, how do you even, like, justify what you're reading in the Bible that you have the true understanding of it?
You know what I should have done? Yeah, did you open with me to Tobit? Actually, let's go to Maccabees. Didn't he want me to go to the Word of God? let's open your Bible, your Word of God, to Tobit 3:11. But Pasha, this man is
I love Tobit.
I would like you to know I don't accept that word of God.
Yeah. Oh, now we're playing which Word of God do you get to accept? That's hilarious. By the way, speaking of, and then I'll let you go because it's philosophy and apologetics is nice, but time with the wife's even nicer, and it's more fruitful for me, according to my subjective pronouncements. No, what I was going to tell you is that let me see when this is. You know Full Armor Apologetics, by the way?
Yeah, he just interviewed Gary Habermas. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Vartan. He's going to have me on Tuesday morning.
Yeah,
8,
watch that.
to talk about this kind of stuff, canonization and justification of the Word of God. So that'll be cool. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Let me just check before I leave if we have any other donation super chats, because I would hate to shut it off before. Kid Gamer, another $1. Wouldn't instrumentalism be incompatible with reliable senses, direct, immanent realism, and inferential knowledge that are made possible in orthodoxy? So what he's talking about here is, I take kind of more of a instrumentalist view of science. And that doesn't negate, I would say, the reliability of our senses. What Wilford Sellers talks about, the manifest image, and then there's a scientific image, just kind of direct experience and stuff like that. It's just what I think is that, and of course, your senses are involved in your immediate experience, and kind of the manifest image are certainly involved in, or God, the God of Orthodoxy makes that possible. But the problem is with science is that, first of all, I don't know, I'm not convinced that it's in the business to give us, just because it's involved in that. It's sort of like what Klein talks about, the pigeon on the edges and stuff, and it's certainly involved, and some of our intuitions can be correct. I don't know as a whole, as an enterprise, that it's the sort of thing that even wanted to claim to be, or should, in the business of giving metaphysical commentaries. And this is exactly, unfortunately, what science does, is it goes far beyond the bounds of what it actually could ever do, and makes these grand metaphysical kind of claims. Okay, so my thing is that, well, really it's kind of, yes, it deals with reality, and perhaps there's some sort of kind of realism at some levels that we can have kind of a correspondence theory, but as a whole, I think that it's more a praxis, a techne, made to predict and do and make certain things about the world in which, and so it has to have some correspondence, but not the way like either a naive realist or maybe even a critical realist, and a direct realist would say. And so I'm happy to just be like, I use it as an instrument while I'm opened to science having direct realism. I don't know how I would do it. I wouldn't know how to get science to do that. Does that make sense? And so I default into, but I'm fine with an instrumentalist. And it gets me out of a lot of ontological problems between different competing paradigms within science. It's like, so I guess that's, long story short, how I would say that. I'm not opposed to science like being able to get to the level of some type of realism. In fact, assume at some levels it probably does. But I don't know how that's possible, or how would one do that, and especially given the kind of conflicts that the paradigms have. And so I default to an instrumentalist view. Or what's another word that I could use? I don't want to say anti-realist. Metaphysical quietist. I'm open, but I'm quiet about what ontological commitments and how that actually corresponds with reality from the scientific image. Does that make sense? So what I'm trying to say is that, like, if you're a direct realist, that's some pretty ambitious claims within science that are going to be easy to knock down. So I take a modest proposal with an openness, right, to that by defaulting to an instrumentalist. That's my position. And I don't think that's incompatible at all with orthodoxy at all.
Yeah, how would a direct realist deal with history, basically?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question of justification, too. It's like, well, if all the other paradigms were wrong, but now we're in the right one, how do I know that in the future, my future self's going to look back and be like, oh, yeah, but you were wrong in that? Maybe that's possible, but then I need a criteria for that justification, right? And that's a pretty ambitious, actually, thing to do that I don't think anybody can pull off. Am I totally opposed to a real? No, like, I just don't think anybody's like fully pulled it off, and it's going to get you a whole bunch of problems too. And then what are you going to say about the quantum world that contradicts like the other physics, as far as once you commit to some sort of realism? It's like instrumentalism allows me to be like, I don't know, because I didn't make the claims that that's exactly how reality is, or that there's some direct realism with. So I don't have that problem. I'll be, like, maybe it is like this, maybe it isn't. But like, I don't have to get involved in it because I don't use science to give me metaphysical commentaries. I use it as an instrument. I think that's the best way to go. Any other questions before? Let's see. All right, thank you guys. What a wonderful night. May God bless you. May the Transfiguration, if you're on the old calendar, you be blessed by the Lord revealing himself and his divine energies. What a perfect end to this stream, to go into the Transfiguration. All right, God bless, guys. Pray for me and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Father Deacon. Bye.